The vote passed at 14:03 Galactic Standard Time. I watched it happen the way you watch a door close on something you spent your whole life building. Not with screaming, not with shaking hands, with the kind of stillness that only comes when you already knew, when you spent 3 years knowing, and the knowing finally became a fact you had to wear on your skin. 11 lights turned red on the display panel above the conclave chamber floor. 1 stayed blue. Ours. The Delvari counselor, Kethvaro his name was, or at least the vowel approximation my translator implant gave me, turned his compound eyes toward our delegation table and made a sound through his methane apparatus that my implant rendered as a polite clearing of the throat. It was not polite. I had read enough Delvari behavioral files to know it was the sound they made when they found something faintly amusing but too small to bother noticing. I was Ambassador Yael Devar, 47 years old. Born in a pressurized habitat ring above a planet that still did not have a name, only a catalog number, because the Conclave had not seen fit to grant us naming rights for worlds we had lived on for 2 generations. My mother had died in that habitat ring, in the section where the recycled air tasted like old copper, and the lighting panels flickered at the same frequency as a headache. She had died not in any dramatic way. She had died because the medical resupply convoy had been held at the Keth border inspection station for 11 weeks, and the medication she needed had been in one of those cargo containers, and by the time the convoy was released, the math had done its work without any help from anyone. The Conclave had called it a processing delay. I thought about that now, watching the red lights hold steady above my head. Then I stopped thinking about it. I folded that thought into a very small shape and put it in a drawer I had been putting things in for 23 years, and I stood up. I picked up my datapad, I straightened my jacket. The jacket was earth-made, blue-gray, the color of Lake Michigan on a November morning. I had brought it specifically. Some things you wear for yourself. Kethvaro made another sound. This one my implant did not render as language. It mapped to something between amusement and dismissal, which in the Delvari register was functionally the same thing. The other counselors had already begun murmuring to one another, that particular kind of murmuring that fills a room after a vote goes the way everyone expected, comfortable and satisfied, and already thinking about the next item on the agenda. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Not because I needed 4 seconds, because I wanted them to look at me for 4 seconds. I said, "You will want to remember this room." Nobody answered. Kethvaro's filtration mask hissed with a slow exhale. "This exact moment," I said, the way it felt to be certain. The Vreth representative on the second tier, the ancient one with iridescent throat fans that spread wide when he was feeling generous with his contempt, tilted his head at an angle that, per my files, indicated something like pity, the kind of pity you give something that does not understand the size of what it is facing. I picked up my bag. I walked out. The door of the Galactic Conclave chamber hissed shut behind me. The sound it made was smaller than I expected. I had always imagined a door like that would make a large sound when it closed. It did not. It made a sound like an envelope being sealed. The corridor outside was pale-walled and humming with the ambient frequency of the station's life support, a low sound that lived behind everything else, something you stopped noticing after your first week, and then noticed again every time you were about to do something that could not be undone. I noticed it now. My aide, a young man named Oliver, 26 years old, 3 months into his first diplomatic posting, was waiting for me in the corridor, with his datapad clutched against his chest, and an expression on his face that someone had once taught him was neutral, but was actually the face of a person who very much wanted to ask a question and had decided against it. I kept walking. He fell into step beside me. We walked for 30 seconds. The corridor curved. The ambient hum shifted pitch slightly. Somewhere behind us, the chamber doors were probably already opening for the next session. Oliver said, "Ambassador." "I know. They voted to." "I know." He was quiet for another few seconds. I could feel him working something out, turning it over. "What do we do now?" he asked. I pulled out my personal device, the encrypted one, 9 security layers, none of them registered with the Conclave's Communications Oversight Authority. The Conclave had a rule that all diplomatic communications from member delegation quarters had to pass through their relay network. We had agreed to that rule 18 years ago. We had also spent 18 years building something else. I pulled up a message addressed to 12 recipients. None of those recipients had names that appeared in any conclave database. The message was 2 words. I sent it. Now, I said to Oliver, we wait for the next part. He looked at me. His datapad was still clutched to his chest. He had the expression now of someone who understood just enough to understand that he did not understand enough. How long do we wait? He asked. We already have been, I said. At the end of the corridor, there was a junction. Left went toward the human delegation quarters. Right went toward the transit docks. I turned right. Oliver hesitated, then followed. In the junction, half visible behind a structural column, I caught a glimpse of a young Vreth diplomat. Junior, new, maybe 80 years old by their count, which made him their equivalent of someone still learning where things were. He was watching me. His throat fans were pulled in tight against his neck, the way they went when a Vreth was registering something they could not categorize. He started to open his mouth. Don't, I said, not loud, not mean, just done. I kept walking. The transit dock smelled like ozone and the particular chemical signature of ships that had been traveling through fold space, a smell like the air right before a storm that never quite breaks. I found my gate. The shuttle was boarding. I joined the line, an ordinary line of people with bags and datapads, and the general exhausted posture of people who had been away from somewhere that felt like home and were going back now. Oliver caught up with me at the boarding ramp. They think we lost, he said quietly. I handed my credentials to the boarding scanner. They think we left, I said. The scanner beeped. I walked on. The galaxy, as far as the Galactic Conclave was concerned, had just made its decision. A clean, simple, 11-to-1 decision. Humanity had been found in violation of the Covenant of Measured Stars, which was a document that, translated plainly, said, you expand too fast. You breed in numbers that make us uncomfortable. You show up in places we have not given you permission to show up, and we would like you to stop. The sanction was total. No resource trade, no territory rights, no legal standing in conclave space for human expansion vessels. 22 years of diplomacy, 36 years of human presence at that table, 1 chair, 1 vote, 1 blue light in a sea of red ones. Gone. They thought we were leaving. I settled into my seat on the shuttle. Through the small port window, the station fell slowly behind as we pulled away, growing smaller, the lights of it receding in the dark until it looked like any other star. My datapad chirped. A confirmation. One of the 12 recipients acknowledging the message, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. I put the datapad face down on my knee. My mother had told me once, in the habitat ring, in the copper air section, when I was maybe 9 years old, and furious about something small, the way 9-year-olds are furious about small things. Baby, the most dangerous thing in any room is the person who does not need to win the argument. I had not understood it then. I had been understanding it slowly for 38 years since. Outside the window, the station was a pinprick now, and then it was nothing, and then we hit fold space, and the stars stopped being stars, and became long lines of light, and the shuttle hummed, and I closed my eyes. The clock was running. I had set it 19 months ago. Commander Owen Farrell had been eating instant noodles when the message came in. This was not a coincidence exactly. Owen ate instant noodles with the frequency of a man who had decided, at some point in his 30s, that the parts of life worth paying close attention to did not include food, so food had been simplified. Instant noodles, protein packs, whatever the mess bay had on auto schedule. His crew found this mildly horrifying, and also oddly reassuring, the way a captain's total disregard for his own meals seemed to suggest his attention was somewhere more important. His attention was, in fact, somewhere more important. He was sitting in his cabin on the ship called the Unscheduled Appointment, which was listed in no conclave registry, no human civilian registry, and technically did not exist, in the sense that no government body that anyone could name had signed off on its construction, its mission profile, or its current position in the dark water between the conclave's 3rd and 4th spiral territories. The ship existed in the way that certain necessary things exist, quietly, without permission, because someone had looked at a map and seen a gap. Owen had been in that gap for 19 months. He read the two-word message. He set his noodles down. He looked at the ceiling of his cabin for a moment, which was dark and close, and smelled like metal and recycled air, and he said, "To no one." There it is. He was not relieved. He was not anxious. He was the way he always was when a long-anticipated thing finally arrived, very still, like a man who has been holding a door open and has finally felt the person on the other side begin to push. He put the datapad in his jacket pocket. He picked the noodles back up. He ate the rest of them. Then he went to the bridge. The unscheduled appointment was a deep-range reconnaissance vessel, which was a technical description that did not begin to capture what it had actually been doing for 19 months. 41 humans on the crew, 9 non-humans, 2 Geth refugees who had left Conclave territory under circumstances the file described as voluntary relocation, and Owen described as they had better options and took them. 3 Maressi who had, in fact, signed on originally because of a situation involving outstanding gambling debts owed to a person Owen had once done a favor for, and who had stayed because they had found something on this ship worth staying for, which was the particular quality Owen had and could not name, and would have been embarrassed to try. And 4 others, different origins, different reasons, all variations on the same theme, people who found themselves at an angle to the Conclave's version of how things were, and had signed onto a ship run by a man who did not seem disturbed by that angle. Owen stepped onto the bridge. His navigation officer, a woman named Clara, 29, from the Scottish Islands, steady as weather was not, looked up from her console. "Message authenticated," she said. "I know." The vote passed. "I know." She looked at him. She had a way of looking at him when she was waiting for him to be shaken that was starting to become a joke between them. The look and the consistent absence of shaking. "So we move," she said. "We've been moving," Owen said. "We're just not hiding it anymore." He pulled up the main display. It was a map of Conclave space, but not the official one. Not the public-facing chart with its registered shipping lanes and its approved transit corridors, and its clean lines indicating where things were and where things were not allowed to be. This was the other map. 19 months of work. 41 humans and 9 non-humans, running silent in a sensor gap they had identified before they ever arrived, mapping everything the Conclave thought nobody was mapping. The Conclave's sensor net was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. 17,000 relay buoys distributed across the whole of their territory, each one monitoring mass, electromagnetic output, fold space disturbance, and 11 other variables Owen's engineers had catalogued and written long reports about. The Conclave had been building this net for 200 years. They were very proud of it. They had also been building it from inside their own territory, looking outward, which meant they had spent 200 years creating a system that could see anything coming, and had never once thought to model what it looked like from the other side. From the other side, the gaps were obvious. Not huge, not glaring. The kind of gaps that only became visible when you had enough patience to look at the whole net from a sufficient distance, and were willing to spend 19 months in the dark to map the seams. Owen's ship had spent 19 months in one seam. 11 other ships had spent varying stretches of time in 11 others. He had not met the captains of those 11 ships in person. He knew them the way you know people you are working with across a great distance, through message patterns, through the things they caught and sent back, through the texture of how they reported. Captain Nadia Reeves on the ship called the considered response. Captain Eli Okafor on the ship called the other shoe. 9 others, 12 ships total, all dark, all patient, all doing the same thing. Building a nervous system. Owen looked at the map now, the real map, the one they had built in 19 months of silence, and he felt the familiar thing. Not pride exactly. Something less warm than pride. The satisfaction of a precisely placed thing, finally doing what it was designed to do. "Clara," he said. "Yes, sir." "Begin passive signal on frequency Delta 9. She did not hesitate. She had been waiting for this for 5 months, which was when she had quietly figured out what Delta 9 was actually for, and had never brought it up, because bringing it up was not how things were done on this particular ship. The signal went out, passive, untraceable by the Conclave's equipment, because it ran at a frequency the Conclave's equipment did not monitor. having never had a reason to monitor it. It would reach the other 11 ships. They would hear it. They would begin their own sequences. And the Conclave's sensor net, all 17,000 buoys of it, would register nothing. Owen's weapons officer, a man named Marcus, who was compact and deliberate, and had a habit of finishing other people's sentences in his head before they finished them out loud, came to stand beside Owen at the display. Marcus looked at the map, at the gaps, at the 11 positions marked in blue where the other ships were sitting in their own seams. When they figure out what this is, Marcus said, they're going to have a very specific reaction. I know. It's going to be that sound, the Delvari one. Owen looked at the map. Which sound? The one that means they underestimated something and can't figure out when it happened. Owen had heard that sound exactly once in person, 3 years ago, at a conclave border inspection where a human cargo vessel had been flagged and held, and Owen had been in the room when the inspection officer reviewed the cargo manifest and discovered that the listed contents were entirely accurate and entirely legal, and that he had held this ship for 6 days, for no reason he could now articulate. The sound had been involuntary, compound eyes doing something they were not designed to do in public. He had filed that sound away, the way he filed things. He had a drawer, too. Different shape than Yael's. Same practice. Marcus, he said. Sir, run me the confirmed contacts on relay lines 7 through 19. Marcus pulled it up. Owen stood there and looked at it. Relay lines 7 through 19 were the Conclave's primary civilian supply network for the quadrant. Food, medicine, energy cells, water processing components, the unglamorous infrastructure of keeping 300 species alive. Owen had mapped every node, every junction, every redundancy path and backup relay on lines 7 through 19 over the course of 11 months, because that was the thing about a nervous system. It was useful for more than one kind of signal. He had also not touched a single one. Not a buoy displaced, not a signal delayed, not a single container of medicine or food or water processing components interfered with in any way. He had simply mapped it. He had simply known it. There was a difference between having a thing and using it. Owen had thought about that difference for a long time. 19 months of thinking time had been more than enough to reach a conclusion he was comfortable with. Clara called from her console. Sir, the considered response is signaling receipt. Good. The other shoe is signaling receipt. Good. All 12 confirmed within the next 3 minutes, if the pattern holds. Owen looked out through the forward viewport. The Conclave's territory was out there in the dark. Vast. Settled. 3 centuries of accumulated certainty about how things worked and who was important, and what the ordering of the galaxy looked like. He thought about the Conclave chamber. He had never been inside it. He had seen photographs in briefing files, the tiered seating, the voting panel with its row of lights, the single chair in the human delegation section. 1 chair. 22 years they had given humanity 1 chair at a table of 11. He thought about what you built when you had 1 chair, and patience, and 22 years to think about what a chair actually meant. All 12 confirmed, Clara said. Owen nodded. Maintain position, he said. Let's see what they do next. What the Conclave did next was exactly what Owen had predicted they would do. Nothing. For the first 6 hours. 6 hours of administrative motion, of the vote being formally recorded, of the human delegation's exit being logged, of the Conclave proceeding to the next item on its agenda, with the smooth momentum of an institution that had been doing this for 300 years and had every expectation of doing it for 300 more. Then relay buoy 7441 went dark. Owen saw it on his display before the Conclave's maintenance system had registered it as an anomaly. He watched the maintenance system log it as a probable sensor failure. He watched a repair order be automatically generated. He watched the repair order join a queue behind 14 other pending repair orders in that sector. Then buoy 7442 went dark. The repair order queue added 1 more item. Then, in a different part of Conclave space entirely, a freight convoy crossing through the Vethkora transit zone reported an anomalous gravitational reading that their navigation system could not fully account for. The convoy held position, which was standard protocol. A navigation support request went out. The Conclave's transit authority logged it. The log joined the daily report, which would be reviewed at the end of the shift. Owen looked at his display. Not damaged. Not touched. Just known. And the difference between knowing and not knowing was the same as the difference between holding a door open and not knowing the door was there. He finished his coffee. He looked out at the dark. Marcus came to stand beside him again. "It's starting," Marcus said. "It's been started," Owen said. "We're just watching the clock now." On the far end of the bridge, the Maresi crew member, whose name translated approximately as Veth Sora, but who had told the crew to call her Vera, because the translation was close enough and easier on everyone, looked up from her console. She had been with this crew for 4 years. She had seen Owen in enough situations to have formed a fairly precise model of him. "Sir," she said. "Vera, I have a question that I have been waiting an appropriate time to ask." "Ask it." "When they realize the size of this," she said, and paused, and chose her next words with the care of someone who had learned a language as an adult, and still sometimes weighed each word before placing it. "What do you want them to understand first?" Owen looked at the display, at the nervous system they had built, at the buoys going dark, and the freight convoy holding position, and the relay lines sitting untouched and fully mapped, and the 11 other ships and their 11 other seams, all receiving the same passive signal on Delta 9. "That we could have done more," he said, and didn't. Vera was quiet for a moment. "Will they understand that?" Owen picked up a new cup of coffee. It was also instant. Everything on this ship was instant, which was a fact that had never once bothered him. "Not right away," he said. "Oliver asked me once, on the flight back to Earth, staring at the fold space lines through the shuttle window with the expression of someone who had packed for a different kind of trip and was now reassessing whether I had ever been afraid this would not work. I told him I had been afraid of a lot of things. He asked me which things. I told him that was a longer conversation than the remaining flight time. He accepted that. Oliver was good at accepting things that could not be immediately resolved, which was, in my experience, the single most useful quality a person could have, more useful than intelligence, more useful than dedication, more useful even than the ability to read a room, because reading a room was only good once you were in the room, and most of the work worth doing happened long before that. We landed at the coast. I had been born inland, not the old kind of inland, where the ground had always been dry, but the new kind, the kind made by the fact that things which had once been water edge were now water, and what had once been further back was now the edge. The city where I grew up had a water line that had moved 3 times in my lifetime. People had moved with it. People always moved. Moving was, in the long view, one of the things humans were best at. The building was on the ridge. It had no sign. It was the kind of building that was there if you knew it was there, and invisible if you did not, which was a design principle that had served it well for the 11 years it had been operating. The room inside was not impressive. 12 chairs around a long table, a wall display, a coffee carafe that had been full at some point, and was now at that particular stage of wrongness, where the coffee remaining in it had been there long enough to become something philosophically different from coffee. People in the room had been awake for varying lengths of time. The display showed conclave space, the real map, with the 12 ship positions marked in blue, and the relay lines, and the sensor buoys, and the 261 conclave installations that our people had mapped, and that the conclave did not know we had mapped. I sat down. The 12 people in the room were all people who had been in this work for a long time, long enough to have stopped needing to fill silences. We sat for a moment, looking at the display. Someone said, "How long before they connect it?" "They're already connecting it," I said. "The question is what picture they see when they do." Another person, a man named Gareth, who had the quiet quality of someone who had spent his career in rooms where the wrong word cost more than most people earned. "The buoys going dark. Do we know the timeline on their maintenance response?" "Average 2 weeks to physical repair on buoys in that sector. The anomalies on the freight routes will be logged in the daily reports. The Keth research station frequency issue will take them longer to identify, because they will spend the first 2 weeks assuming it is an equipment fault on their end." Gareth nodded. He was looking at the display, at the research station positions marked along the Keth perimeter. The Keth had not blinked at me when I left the conclave chamber. That was not unusual. The Keth did not blink, but I had read the files. I had read the behavioral studies, and the historical records, and the accounts of every human diplomat who had sat across from a Keth representative for the past 30 years. And the one thing that was consistent across all those accounts was this. The Keth believed their certainty was a form of intelligence. They had been uncontested for 600 years, which is a long time to be uncontested, long enough to mistake the absence of challenge for the impossibility of it. I had thought about the Keth a great deal over the past 23 years. I had thought about my mother more. The research station frequency issue was not an accident. It was a signal, of a specific kind, designed to carry one piece of information and no others. The signal said, "We are here. We have been here. You did not know. And we are telling you now, because telling you is a choice we are making, and not telling you would have been equally possible." That was, in its way, the entire point. Oliver, who had come into the room after me and taken a chair near the wall because there was no seat at the table available, and he had not presumed to take one, raised his hand slightly. The gesture of someone who was in a room where hand-raising was not usually how things were done, but who had not yet learned a different way to enter a conversation. I nodded at him. "The Keth," he said. He paused. He was working out how to ask what he wanted to ask without it sounding like what it was, which was, "Are we sure we want to do this to the Keth specifically? They've been a conclave pillar for 6 centuries. "Yes," I said. "If they respond with force. They won't." "You're certain?" The room was quiet, not an uncomfortable quiet, the quiet of people who had been thinking about the same question for a long time and were waiting to hear how it would be stated. "The Keth understand one thing very well," I said. "They understand position, where you stand, and what you are capable of from where you stand. The moment they identify the frequency on their research stations, they will not think about responding with force. They will think about how long we have been there without their knowledge, and they will reverse engineer what that means about what else we know that they don't know we know." Oliver absorbed this. "That sounds like a very uncomfortable thing to reverse engineer," he said. "That is the point." On the display, a new marker appeared. Clara's update from the unscheduled appointment. Buoys 7441 through 7449, now confirmed dark. The Conclave's maintenance queue had begun generating repair orders, all of them categorized as routine, none of them flagged as a pattern. They would not flag it as a pattern for another 4 days. In 4 days, 12 more buoys would go dark in 3 different sectors, and the freight anomalies would still be unresolved, and a Vreth communication array would be registered as experiencing unexplained signal delay, which was a description that was technically accurate and completely missing the point. Gareth said, "They'll send someone to talk." "They'll send someone to threaten first," I said. "Then they'll send someone to talk." Timeline? 10 days, 12 at the most. And Owen? Owen is already in position. Someone refilled the coffee carafe, not with better coffee, just more of the same coffee that had been sitting there. The room smelled like work that had been going on for a long time, and still had further to go. Oliver was looking at the display, at the blue markers, at the scale of what was on that map. He said, quietly, to no one specifically, "Are we the good guys in this?" Nobody answered right away. I stood up. I went to the coffee carafe. I poured. The coffee was bad. I drank it. "We're the people who remember what it cost," I said. "That has to be enough for right now." Oliver nodded. He was not convinced. He was not unconvinced enough to push back. He was doing the thing young people do when they encounter an answer that is true but does not feel like enough, which is to hold it and keep going and see if more context arrives. I respected that. I had been doing the same thing for 23 years. The display updated again. The Keth Research Station frequency report had been filed internally. They had categorized it as an anomaly. They had assigned it to their technical review board, which met bi-weekly. Their next meeting was in 11 days. On the 9th day, they would receive another signal on the same frequency, different content, still not hostile, still not transmitting anything damaging, just present, like a hand on a shoulder, like a voice in a quiet room that says, "I have been here for a while. I thought you should know." I stood at the display and looked at the map we had built, and I thought about the Vreth diplomat in the junction corridor, the young one with his tight throat fans, and I wondered what he had been about to say. I had told him not to. I still thought that was right. But I wondered. The display lit up, a new notification. One of the Conclave's long-range communication arrays. Vreth operated, in the outer territories, had registered a signal timing anomaly. The array was functioning. The signal was being broadcast. The signal was arriving, somewhere downstream, 400 milliseconds later than it should. 400 milliseconds was nothing. It was also everything, if you understood what it meant. It meant something was in the signal path. Something that was, by every measure available to the Conclave's equipment, not there. I finished my coffee. They'll start calling our old embassy line, I said, within a week. Gareth looked at me. The line we decommissioned. The one they think we decommissioned. His expression did the thing it did when a piece of information arrived, and he needed a moment to fit it into the map he already had. You kept it active. We kept it monitored, I said. There is a difference. He looked at the display for a long moment. Then, from Gareth, who in 30 years of this work, I had heard express something approaching admiration, exactly twice. How long did you plan for this? I thought about the question. I thought about a 9-year-old girl in a habitat ring above an unnamed planet, in the copper air section, watching her mother breathe through the kind of difficulty that has a name, and a treatment, and a supply convoy that was sitting at a border inspection station 11 light minutes away. Long enough, I said. Owen had expected the fleet. What he had not fully modeled was how large it would be. 43 vessels materialized out of fold space in a formation that was, by any calculation, an overwhelming response to one ship sitting in open space with its running lights on. The ships were Conclave First Response, the designation given to the fleet elements maintained specifically for situations that required something more than a strongly worded message, but the Conclave preferred to describe using language that stopped short of calling it what it was. Owen stood at the forward viewport and looked at the 43 ships, and felt nothing in particular, which was not the same as feeling nothing. It was the specific quality of a feeling that had been prepared for so long that when it arrived, it had the texture of a familiar room. They're hailing us, said Marcus from the communications console. Owen looked at the clock on his console. 0907 ship time. He went and got coffee. Real coffee this time, or at least the closest thing this ship had to real coffee, which was a brand in a yellow bag that his sister sent him when she could, which was less often than either of them would have liked, but more often than a ship that officially did not exist, technically had a right to receive personal mail from family members. He sat down. He looked at the clock. He let them hail. Marcus looked at him every 90 seconds with the expression of a man who understood the tactical value of making the other side wait, but was also personally made uncomfortable by the waiting, which was a quality in Marcus that Owen had considered a limitation, and had over time revised his assessment of, because Marcus's discomfort with waiting made him precise in a way that pure comfort with waiting would have eroded. At 0911 ship time, Owen said, "Put them through." The display lit up. The Delvari fleet admiral was exactly what the file said he would be. Compound eyes, methane filtration apparatus, the posture of a being who had been the most significant presence in any room he had entered for most of his adult life, which in Delvari terms was a long time. His name, per the intelligence briefing Owen had read 11 months ago, and updated twice since, was Admiral Keleth Var, of the 3rd Fleet Command, decorated veteran of the Conclave's last significant territorial dispute, which had been 40 years ago, and had been settled without the firing of a weapon, because the opponent had looked at the 3rd Fleet Command and decided the math was not in their favor. The Admiral began speaking. He spoke for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. His translator was good, better than Owen's implant by a measurable margin, so the English rendering was clean and direct. The human vessel was in violation of the movement restrictions imposed under the new sanctions, was occupying a position that had not been approved by Conclave Transit Authority, was operating without registered identification, in a zone governed by Conclave jurisdiction, and was directed to power down non-essential systems, transmit full crew and cargo manifests, and prepare for boarding inspection pending resolution of their violation status. The ultimatum had 4 subclauses. Owen listened to all of them. He had a gift, which he was aware of, and had never quite worked out how to describe, the ability to listen to something and be completely present for the listening, while simultaneously operating another part of his mind in a completely separate register. So he heard the Admiral, every word, every subclause, and at the same time he was noting the slight tremor in the filtration mask's exhaust valve that indicated elevated respiratory rate, and the way the Admiral's left compound eye had a microsecond more lag in its tracking movement than the right one, which per the behavioral files indicated that the Admiral was, somewhere underneath the performance of authority, working something through. When the Admiral finished, Owen waited 2 seconds. Then, Admiral. Commander, you will comply with the directives as issued. Failure to. Admiral. Flat. Not hostile. The tone of a person who has one thing to say and needs the other person to be briefly quiet, so it can be said. I am going to show you something. He nodded to Clara. The display behind Owen, visible on the transmission, lit up. Not a weapon system, not a tactical overlay, not the positions of the other 11 ships, which the Admiral did not yet know existed. A map. 40 years of shipping data. Every conclave supply route, every fuel depot, every food distribution hub, every medical relay, every water processing installation. Not military, not strategic, in the conventional sense. The actual skeleton of how the conclave kept its 300-member species alive, day by day, year by year. Every junction and choke point and backup path and single point of failure, mapped and color-coded and notated with the meticulous care of people who had spent a long time looking at a thing with the specific kind of attention you give to something you might someday need to discuss. And in red, distributed across the map, 104 choke points. Not all of them, not even most of them. 104, selected because each one was a place where a small disruption would create a large downstream effect, and a large disruption would create something that could not be easily fixed. Not targeted, not weapons designated, not armed. Just shown. The Admiral looked at the map for 11 seconds. Owen counted. We have had this for 11 years, Owen said. We did not use it. We did not want to. We wanted a seat at the table. We had one chair at your table for 22 years, one vote out of 11, and we sat in that chair and we voted, and we participated in good faith, and 2 days ago you took the chair back because your math said you could. He let the Admiral look at the map for another 5 seconds. We are not here to cause harm. We are not here because we want what happened in the past 2 days to define the next century. We are here because the terms of human participation in galactic affairs need to be renegotiated, from a position that accurately reflects what humanity actually is. He paused. Which is not what you thought we were when you voted. The Admiral's filtration mask exhaled slowly. Owen watched the left compound eye track, and lag, and track again. The Admiral said, "What do you want?" It was not the voice of a man delivering a prepared line. It was the voice of a man who had prepared many lines and had arrived at a moment where none of them were the right tool. Owen almost felt something like sympathy. Almost. We want what we have always wanted, he said. Full membership, real membership. Not one chair and 11 votes counting against us. Equal standing, equal access, equal recognition for territories we have settled and developed for 2 generations. We want the movement restrictions lifted. We want the naming rights that every other conclave member holds for worlds they inhabit. He folded his hands on the console in front of him. We want to be treated as what we are. The Admiral's eye tracking had steadied. He was working something out with the part of his mind that did the same thing Owen's did. You have 1 ship, the Admiral said. I have 43. You have 43 that I can see, Owen said. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Owen watched the Admiral's filtration mask, watched the exhale valve, watched the thing happening in the Admiral's expression that the behavioral files called involuntary recognition of an asymmetry in information, which was the formal way of saying the Admiral was working out what he did not know, and was beginning to understand that what he did not know was large. On the far end of the bridge, Vera was watching the transmission with an expression Owen had never quite been able to categorize. She had told him once, on a night shift, that her species had a word for the specific feeling of watching a powerful thing discover it has less than it believed. The word did not translate directly. She had tried to describe it. Not satisfaction, not relief, something closer to the feeling of a long-held breath finally being let go. Owen thought he knew what she meant. Marcus stepped up beside him and said, very quietly, for Owen's ears only, 11 other ships just dropped stealth protocols. Owen did not look at the console. He did not change his expression. The Admiral had access to the same sensor data. Owen watched the Admiral receive it, watched 43 ships suddenly registering 11 additional vessels appearing in various positions across the sector, all of them holding position, none of them weapons active. "We are not here for a confrontation," Owen said. "We are here for a conversation, a real one, with accurate information on both sides." The Admiral looked at Owen for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to consult with the Council." "Take the time you need," Owen said. He reached forward and adjusted the transmission to standby without breaking the connection, giving the Admiral privacy to consult while leaving the line open. Then he leaned back in his chair. Vera said, from her console, "That was the part I have been waiting for." "Which part?" Owen said. "The part where they remember that calling us is their first instinct," she said. "Even now." Owen looked at the display, at the 43 ships, at the 11 blue markers now visible to everyone, at the map still showing in the upper quadrant of the transmission display, with its red choke points sitting quiet and unactivated and full of a meaning that did not require activation to communicate. He thought about what Yael had said to him in the message before this all began. Not the two-word message that had started the clock, an earlier one, from a year ago, when the plan was still being shaped and there were still decisions being made about what shape it should take. She had written, "The hardest thing is not the capability. The hardest thing is choosing, every day, not to use it. That is what they will not expect. That is what no one ever expects." Owen looked at his coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway. The Admiral came back on the line. He looked different. Not smaller, exactly. That was not the right word. He looked like a man who had just consulted with people who had asked him questions he did not have good answers to, and had come back to the conversation knowing that the shape of it had changed while he was away. "The Council," the Admiral said, "would like to know the terms you are prepared to propose." Owen looked at the display. "Not here," he said. "A proper negotiation. Neutral ground. Ambassador Devar will be present on behalf of humanity. You will need to determine who speaks for the conclave." The Admiral was quiet for a moment. "Ambassador Devar," he said, "was just removed from her diplomatic standing by conclave vote." Owen almost smiled. He did not quite. "Yes," he said. "I know. The moon they chose had an atmosphere that sat at the edge of comfort for almost every species involved. The Delvari found the oxygen concentration marginally high. The Vreth found the temperature 2 degrees warmer than ideal. The Keth, who had not sent their primary representative but their second-tier delegate, found the lighting fractionally off their preferred spectrum. I had chosen it for exactly these reasons. Everyone slightly off. Nobody at home. It was a principle I had read about in a negotiation theory document from 200 years ago, written by a human diplomat working on a land dispute between two groups, who had been arguing about the same territory for so long they had forgotten what it looked like when nobody was arguing. The principle was simple. If you want everyone to think clearly, instead of performing comfort, take the comfort away from everyone equally. I had added it to my working file 12 years ago, and waited for a moment that required it. The chamber was a prefabricated structure, brought in by human ships, assembled in 4 days. Round table, 10 chairs, no tier system, no elevated seating, no architectural suggestion that some participants were more central than others. The lighting was even. The air was what it was. I sat down first. The conclave delegation filed in. The Delvari sent Admiral Keleth Var, the same admiral who had spoken with Owen, which told me something. They had decided to treat this as a continuation of that conversation, rather than a fresh beginning. The Vreth sent the ancient one, Yeth Kavara, the one with the iridescent throat fans, the one who had looked at me from the second tier in the conclave chamber, with the expression of an old species watching a young one fail to understand its own limitation. And the Keth. The Keth sent a delegate I had not seen before, not their senior representative, who had been in every session for the past 8 years, who I had studied until I knew the precise angle at which he tilted his head when he was dismissing something, who I had prepared for, a different one, younger by the look of it, which for the Keth still meant very old, but new to this function. Sending a delegate they were willing to spend points with. Smart, I thought. They had learned something. Oliver sat against the wall. He was not at the table. He was an observer, by arrangement. He had his datapad, and he had the expression of someone who had spent the past 10 days reassembling his understanding of the situation, and had arrived at something that was not exactly peace with it, but was at least a working relationship with the uncertainty. I had coffee. The coffee was from home. I had brought it in a thermos. The thermos was old, dented on one side from a time years ago that I did not think about in negotiation rooms. The coffee was the kind my mother had made, which was too strong for most people, and exactly right for me. The Delvari Admiral spoke first. He gave a preamble. The preamble acknowledged the current situation, catalogued the anomalies that had been identified over the past 9 days, listed the 11 ships that had dropped stealth protocols, referenced the mapping data that had been shown during the initial communication, and concluded with a statement that the conclave was prepared to discuss a framework for addressing humanity's concerns within the existing conclave structure. Within the existing structure. I let that sit in the room for a moment. Admiral, I said, the existing structure is the reason we are sitting in a prefabricated building on a moon none of us are comfortable on. The existing structure gave us 1 chair for 22 years. We are not here to discuss our concerns within the existing structure. We are here to discuss a new structure. The Admiral's filtration mask exhaled. Yethkavara's throat fans spread slightly. The spread could mean several things. In this context, with the ambient tension of the room and the angle of his head, I read it as, he is interested in what comes next, which is different from being prepared to agree with it. I laid out the terms. I was not unkind about it. I had thought, over the years, about what unkind would look like in this moment, and I had concluded that unkind would be satisfying for approximately 4 seconds, and would cost us everything we were trying to build for the following century. So I was not unkind. I was precise. Full membership for humanity, not associate membership, not provisional membership, not the special category membership the Conclave's legal framework offered to species they were not certain about, which was a category that carried a tone I was not going to accept. Full membership, equal to the Delvari, equal to the Vreth, equal to the Keth, equal resource access across Conclave trade networks, not the restricted corridors and the inspection delays, and the 12 categories of cargo flagged for secondary review, when carried on human vessels. Equal access. Recognition of territorial occupation for worlds humanity had inhabited for more than 10 years. Naming rights. The right to exist in the places we had lived in for 2 generations. Lifting of the movement restrictions imposed by the vote 3 days ago, effective immediately upon signing. A mutual framework for border stability that would take approximately 3 years to fully ratify, and would, once ratified, be the most difficult piece of conclave governance to dismantle, even if future governing bodies wanted to. I laid all of this out plainly. No rhetoric, no performance of emotion, just the terms, in order, with the reasoning for each one. When I finished, the room was quiet. The Keth delegate had not moved in 11 minutes. The Keth did not fidget. It was impossible to read his expression the way you could read the Delvari mask, or the Vreth throat fans. He simply sat, and the sitting had its own quality, which I had eventually come to understand was not absence of engagement, but the opposite, total engagement, the kind that manifested as perfect stillness. Yethkavara said, "You had leverage, complete leverage." The mapping data alone, presented as it was, established a capability that our Strategic Council will be working through for the next decade. You could have demanded more. I looked at him. What more would you have had us demand? Dominance, he said. The word was flat in the translator, but I knew what he meant by the angle of his head, the careful quality of the word's delivery. He was not suggesting it. He was asking whether it had been considered and set aside, or whether it had never been on the table. No, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Why not? I picked up my coffee. I took a drink. It was still the right temperature. I thought about what to say. I thought about the habitat ring, about the copper air, about 11 weeks and a supply convoy, and the math doing its work. I thought about every version of this moment I had ever run through my head, in the years before it was a plan, and in the years when it was a plan, and in the nights between sessions when sleep was not available, and thinking was. I thought about every version where I made the choice that left the next generation with something broken to fix. My mother died on a colony ship, I said. in a section of the ring with bad air and a medical supply shortage that lasted 11 weeks because a Keth border inspection station was processing a backlog. I did not look at the Keth delegate when I said this. I have thought about this moment for 23 years. I have thought about every version of it, where I take everything available and burn it down to the foundation. And in every one of those versions, the people who come after us spend the next generation rebuilding something that should not have had to be rebuilt. I set the coffee down. I am tired, I said, of generations that have to rebuild. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. The Admiral's mask was not exhaling with its usual rhythm. Yeth Kavara's throat fans were controlled, too controlled, the way they went when a Vreth was working hard at not revealing what they were working through. And the Keth delegate, who had not moved in 13 minutes, turned his head. Slightly. Just slightly. In my files, I had exactly one reference to Keth head movement, during negotiation, as a behavioral signal, and it was uncertain, flagged as unconfirmed, noted by a human diplomat who had spent 6 years in Keth diplomatic circles and had written, "I cannot be certain what it means." But every time I observed it, something changed. Oliver, at the wall, was very still. Gareth, who had come with me and was seated off to the side with the other support staff, was looking at his datapad in a way that meant he was not reading what was on it. "These terms," the Admiral said finally, "the Mutual Stability Framework, 3 years to ratify. Yes. The movement restrictions. Immediate, upon signing. Yes." He was quiet. He was, I knew, thinking about something I had not put on the list of terms. He was thinking about the 11 ships, about the mapping data, about what it meant that we had sat in their sensor gaps for 19 months and they had not known, and what it suggested about what else they did not know. He was thinking about what it cost to sign and what it cost to refuse to. "I need 48 hours, he said. "You have it," I said. The delegation rose, filed out. The Keth delegate was the last to move, rising from his chair with the deliberate motion of something that has been perfectly still for a long time, and is choosing when to move, not compelled to. At the door he paused. He did not turn. He said, in a voice that the translator rendered with unusual clarity, as though the statement had been constructed carefully before being delivered, "The Covenant of Measured Stars was written 300 years ago. It did not account for a species that measures time the way you do." He left. I looked at the door after it closed. Oliver said, from the wall, very quietly, "What did that mean?" "It meant we have a deal," I said. I picked up my thermos. I poured the last of the coffee into my cup. At the door, one of the Vreth translation staff members was gathering materials from the side tables. He was young, 80 years old by their count. His throat fans were pulled tight in the way that had stayed with me since the corridor outside the conclave chamber. He looked up and saw me watching him. He held very still. I gave him the smallest nod I could make visible. He looked at me for a moment. Something shifted in the set of his throat fans, a millimeter, maybe less. Then he looked back down at his work. Whatever he had wanted to say, in the corridor, on the day I walked out of the conclave chamber with a thermos, and a plan that had been 19 months in the ground growing roots, it waited. Maybe it always would. I drank my coffee. The 48 hours passed. I signed with a pen, an actual pen, black ink, the kind that left a mark you could still read in 100 years. The compact was 3 pages of text and 4 pages of framework, and 2 pages of the mutual stability terms. 11 signatures, human, Delvari, Vreth, Keth, 7 others. The Admiral watched me sign with the pen. "Why a pen?" he asked. I thought about my grandmother, about a room she had described to me once, a room she had sat in with a pen and a document and the feeling of something becoming permanently true in a way that only a mark on paper fully captures. "My grandmother signed her citizenship papers with a pen," I said. "Things worth doing are worth leaving a mark." Nobody asked what I meant by citizenship. Nobody asked what the papers had been for, or what the circumstances were in which they had been necessary, or what country, or what era, or what the room had smelled like. Nobody asked. That was right. Some things you carry in 2 words and put down on a table and let them speak without a footnote. Oliver was at the wall again. He was watching me sign. He had the expression of someone who had arrived at the other side of something and was still locating himself on the new ground. After the signing, when the room was clearing and the conclave delegation was filing toward their transport, he came and stood beside me. "Was this what you planned?" he asked. "Exactly this?" I looked at the document on the table, at the 11 signatures, at the pen still in my hand. "The structure of it," I said. "The exact words changed 100 times." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "The part the Keth delegate said," he said, "about measuring time." "Yes. Do we? Measure it differently?" I put the pen in my jacket pocket, same pocket as always, left side, next to the encrypted device that had 2 words in its sent folder that had started a clock 19 months ago. "We count the things that happened, and we don't forget them," I said. "We build from them, even when they hurt. We wait when we have to, and we move when it is time, and we keep going when most things would have stopped." I picked up my thermos. Empty. "I don't know if that is measuring time differently," I said. "It might just be what grief looks like when it has enough years to build something." We left the moon. I looked out the window on the way up, at the prefabricated building getting smaller, at the moon's pale surface in the light of its distant star, at the dark around it full of ships that were now, formally, on the same side of an agreement they had not been on 3 days ago. Owen's message came in at altitude. No preamble. Just, "Clara says good outcome. Marcus says lively situation resolved. I say, about time. Noodles are getting cold." I wrote back, "Eat your dinner." He wrote, "Already did. 3 hours ago." I put the device away. Oliver was looking out the opposite window. He had been putting something together in his head all day. I could see it on him, the way a person holds a question they have decided is worth the risk of asking. "Did you ever doubt it?" he asked. "Not the plan. You. Did you ever doubt yourself?" I looked out at the dark. The habitat ring was up there somewhere. A catalog number, not a name. My mother was not there anymore, but the ring still was. And the copper air section was still the copper air section. And somewhere in the conclave's administrative records, there was a processing delay logged for a medical supply convoy. 11 weeks. Routine. I thought about what it meant to be the person who remembered, who counted, who built from the counting. "Every day," I said. "And then I got back to work." Oliver nodded. He looked back out his window. We went through fold space, and the stars became lines, and the lines became nothing, and the nothing held us for a while in its ordinary dark, and then the stars came back, and we were pointed toward home.